Good evening. I'm Nancy Chamberlain, Co-Legislative Vice President for North Shore Council, PTSA. I'd like to welcome you to our candidate forum for the general election candidates in the 1st, 45th, and 46th legislative districts. Thank you for taking time out of your busy week to be here this evening. And thank you to our candidates for attending this evening to share their perspectives and goals with us. All candidates were invited and contacted multiple times. We are pleased that the majority of the candidates were able to participate. I'd like to quickly thank the volunteers who are here tonight, especially my partner in crime in North Shore Council, Co-Legislative VP Charlie Griffey-Brown, Co-President Carrie McKenzie for her support on logistics, our Communications Vice President Robin Zabak, and Robin McKenzie for recording this event. This has been a team effort, and we are pleased to be able to make this evening possible. The North Shore Council PTSA serves the local PTAs within the North Shore School District in the cities of Woodinville, Bothell, and Kenmore. PTA is the largest grassroots child advocacy organization in the United States and has been dedicated to advocating for the welfare of all children for over 100 years. Before I introduce your candidates, please remember to silence your cell phones and listen quietly as they answer the questions. North Shore Council PTSA will be recording tonight's candidate forum. The candidates and moderator have provided their consent as required in Washington state law to be photographed and have also agreed that we may post the photos on our website and other media platforms. Thank you all for cooperating with these requirements under Washington state law and for helping us remain in compliance. I'll go over the timeline for this evening. For about the first hour and a quarter, we will have candidate introductions and questions, which have a maximum of 1 minute for each candidate to answer. We will start with the closest candidate to me, and then we'll rotate so that you all have a chance to go first, hopefully by the end of the night, and unfortunately last. At around 8:15, we'll go to our lightning round, which are 20-second answers for the questions. And then we'll finish the evening by taking some questions from the audience. We have passed out note cards, so you can write your questions down on that, and we'll be collecting them in the middle of the evening. Marcia is our timekeeper, and she will be holding up signs for you, letting you know how much time is left for your answer. Okay? I'll go over ground rules. Each participant's responses will be timed in order to allow all candidates equal opportunity to share their perspectives in accordance with 501c3 law and PTA policies and guidelines. To begin, each candidate will have 1 minute to introduce themselves. Following introductions, the candidates will be asked a series of questions. Each candidate will have 1 minute to respond. We will have a lightning round, which is intended to elicit very specific short answers without qualifications to make sure their position is very clearly stated for us. We have made every attempt to generate a broad set of questions around the health, safety, and education of children and youth by soliciting questions from students, parents, and community members. Even so, we know that we have not touched on every subject in this short amount of time. Therefore, we will be taking questions from the audience at the end. In order to limit duplication of questions, not all questions at the end may be asked, and your question may not be asked in its exact form. Hopefully the candidates will be available afterwards if your question is not asked. Thank you all for helping us move efficiently through this process by respecting these guidelines. And now, I would like to move to the introduction of candidates. You will each have 1 minute and we'll start.
Much, and thank you everyone for being here. I am Derek Stanford, State Representative for the 1st District. I currently serve as the chair of the Washington State Caseload Forecast Council, and I also chair the Joint Legislative Audit and Review Committee, which performs audit and research tasks for the legislature. I serve on the Appropriations Committee, which writes the operating budget. I serve on the Business and Financial Services Committee, where I focus on a lot of small business issues. And I serve on the Agriculture and Natural Resources Committee. And I am a parent of 2 kids in North Shore schools. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Debbie Blodgett, and I'm running for the 1st Legislative District for Position 2. This is my first time running. I'm an entrepreneur. I've been a businesswoman for 18 years, owning my own escrow company in Linwood. I was a fashion consultant for 7 years and political activist. I've been an ambassador for Shared Hope International for 4 years, sharing across Washington State the awareness and the signs of sex trafficking of our children in our communities. I am the chairman of the Snohomish County Republican Party, working to get Republicans elected in our county. My platform is to stop the onslaught of more taxation, fix our transportation problems, have a more transparent government, and make our communities safe. We need to rehabilitate and not enable our drug-addicted communities.
Okay. All right. I wasn't sure if I needed an introduction. I'm Representative Shelley Klova, and it's my pride and joy to represent the 1st Legislative District. And this is a very familiar room to me. I got my training through Washington State PTA. I was an advocate, like many of you are, and that really informs the kind of decision maker that I want to be, because I used to sit on the other side as an advocate. I serve on the Transportation Committee. I'm Vice Chair of Commerce, the Acting Chair of Commerce and Gaming, and Vice Chair for the Tech and Economic Development Committee. And some of the things that I'm proud of, the first year that I served, I voted no on the property tax increase. I was able to vote yes, and it passed as a property tax decrease in this last year. I worked to get some funding for I-405 solutions and to increase our opportunity to get law enforcement officers out into the community faster than they currently do. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Manka Dhingra, and I'm the state senator from the 45th Legislative District. Thank you so much for being here today. I ran for office for the very first time last year and won, so thank you very much. I have 2 kids who are in high school, Redmond High School, actually is junior there, and a freshman in Redmond High School as well. I'm a proud recipient of the Golden Acorn. I actually received that award through my volunteer work at Redmond Elementary School. And I ran for office last year because I think it's crucial for people who have real life experiences, who actually want to solve real problems running for office. And I have to say, I was very proud of the legislative session we had this year. In 60 days, with no special sessions, we passed 2 capital budgets. We satisfied the McCleary decision under the Supreme Court. We still have more work to do that. We passed equal pay. We passed reproductive parity. We passed the Voting Rights Act. And most of it was done through bipartisan support. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Dale Fonk. Thank you for hosting us here tonight. I'm a local guy. I grew up in the area. I went to Mariner High School. I graduated from Western Washington University. I have a degree in business administration. I have lived and worked in Woodinville since 1989. In my career as an employer, I have signed more than 20,000 paychecks on the front side. I understand budgets. I understand the necessity to make a budget, to live within a budget, to set aside money for times when the economy is not as robust as it is today. I am looking forward to representing our district in the state senate and not coming to you and saying, we want more taxes. Thank you.
How you doing? My name is Michael Curtis. I'm running in the 45th, position 1. Put it briefly, I am a product of the American dream. I grew up beyond poor, in some of the lowest levels of poverty, and from that was able to be one of the early architects of the future. My first very large piece of work was to build the largest K-12 education network in the country in 1995, before the internet was anything you would even heard of. I do that today. I've been architecting the future, and our legislators need to be people who are architects of the future, and that's what I bring. Thank you.
Good evening, Roger Goodman, representative from the 45th District. Thanks very much to the North Shore PTSA Council for sponsoring this event. I'm finishing my 6th, running now for my 7th term in the State House. I'm one of the few lawyers in the state legislature, so I have to apologize for being a lawyer and a politician. My area of jurisdiction, I am the chair of the Public Safety Committee, so jurisdiction over the criminal justice system, and that's really the focus of my work, to keep our communities safe. But as far as our young people is concerned, that's my other major focus. Foster care, preschool in particular. I sit also on the Early Learning Committee, and so have been very successful in expanding preschool opportunities for our state. And also on the other side of K-12, career and technical, the workforce readiness colleges. So I am, needless to say, highly supportive of the expansion and improvement of our K-12 system, and we'll talk further about that this evening.
Thank you. My name is Amber Krabach. I'm running for State Representative Position 2 in the 45th District. It's an honor to be here today and have the opportunity to talk to you about our state policy issues, particularly in regard to education. Dealing with Washington's education system right now feels a little bit like trying to get a good grade on a test for your math teacher after your private tutor tells you that 2 + 2 = 5. No matter how hard you work to meet the expectations, your teacher can't give you a good grade because you simply aren't calculating the correct answers. As a result, your teacher, who may or may not be friends with the tutor, tells your tutor to increase their hours of instruction with you. So your tutor gets a promotion, you're forced to shell out more for a pay raise for him, and yet you remain hopelessly enslaved to bad instruction because you still cannot pass that test. If we want our education system to thrive, we need to reform the bad policy that is preventing us from succeeding in adequately educating our children. Thank you.
Good evening, thanks for having us. I'm Larry Springer. I'm state representative from the 45th District. I've been in the legislature 14 years now, so I'm not only the most tenured member up here, I'm also chronologically the oldest member up here. And I'm going to do you all a favor by reducing the talking heads from 14 to 13 at 8 o'clock tonight, because like Dale, I sign the front sides of paychecks and my staff at my store are waiting to be paid tonight. So I'm going to go do that before they go home. Quickly, I have been in the legislature for 14 years. I'm the Deputy Majority Leader for the House Democratic Caucus. I serve on the Appropriations Committee, and I also serve on the Finance Committee. Finance Committee is the one that determines what Washington's tax policy is. I'm also serving on the Agricultural and Natural Resources Committee. So most of my work there is around finance and developing budgets, and the most important one we do, of course, is our K-12 budget. So I'm sure we'll talk more about that later. So it's not because I don't like you, I'm going to slip out at 8 o'clock. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Beth Durance-Young, and I'm running for State Senate in the 46th District. I have 2 children who've gone through public schools. My youngest is a senior this year, and I've been involved in PTAs and PTOs. I've served on boards of 2 different, one was a PTA, one was a PTO, and it's very important to be involved in your kids' school. And so thank you for your support of the schools here, and thank you for supporting this forum. Also, my husband and I have been self-employed for several decades, and so I understand the impact of regulations and of taxes on people that are self-employed, have small businesses, and create jobs. And I'm running to give voters an alternative in my district. And I definitely want to favor, okay, I'll stop and talk later.
Hi, thank you for having me tonight. I'm State Senator David Frocht from the 46th District. For purposes of North Shore, I represent the city of Kenmore, and so the 5 schools that are in the North Shore District from Kenmore. I also represent Lake Forest Park and Northeast Seattle. I currently serve as the Vice Chair of the Senate Ways and Means Committee with primary responsibility for the capital budget. I've also been very well involved in the McCleary decision, the McCleary funding packages going back to 2012 and 13, and I'm sure we'll get into that tonight. And in addition, I want to just point out, I've really been heavily involved over the years in higher education policy, particularly in funding out our state need grant, which we are on track to fully fund for the first time in many years, our College Bound program, our DREAM Act 2.0, which I sponsored this year and helped pass through the state Senate, our Opportunity Scholarship Program, and I think really importantly, a new program that is in place, a new college saving program is called the Dream Ahead College Savings Plan, a new 529 plan that I sponsored and passed with the help of many of the people up here tonight. So I look forward to talking to you tonight and getting into all the issues that are facing the North Shore School District. Thank you.
Thank you for being here this evening. I'm Jerry Paulette, and I am also state representative from the 46th District, so the Kenmore portion of North Shore. And like many of you, I was a PTA parent before I went to the legislature, and I was the organizer of the carpools down to Olympia to meet with our legislators and try to fund our schools. We are not even close to fully funding education in the state of Washington. We face massive, multi-million, hundreds of millions of dollars of deficits. There's special education, bilingual education, homeless services, transportation, and for North Shore especially, 24 credits high school, which is not paid for by the state of Washington. This year, I was very proud, after 7 years of work on special ed, passing the first legislation to ensure that we actually assess every kindergartner through 2nd grade for dyslexia and special ed.
Last but not least, well, good evening. My name is Javier Valdez. I'm state representative for position number 2 in the 46th Legislative District. A little about myself: I'm a first-generation Mexican-American and the proud son and grandson of farm workers and laborers. I arrived to Seattle 30 years ago from east of the mountains, where I went to school at the University of Washington. I would not be able to be speaking in front of you today if it was not for public education, K through 12, UW, where I did rely on need grant, Pell grants, work study loans to get me through college. I was appointed last year to the state legislature, where I serve on the Judiciary, Education, and Transportation committees. And in my day job, I work for the city of Seattle, where most of my career has been working to assist women and minority-owned businesses. I look forward to your questions tonight.
Deborah.
Thank you.
This is a question submitted by a student. Given the changes in the workforce of the future, STEM-focused fields like genetic engineering, AI, and clean energy, what support for innovations in education do you have in mind that would enable students to be better prepared to address the challenges we will face in the future?
Well, obviously, there are deficiencies in vocational training. I do feel that we need to bring back more vocational training back into schools. And I totally agree that we need to be prepared for the students of the future and provide those programs. The STEM program is amazing. I know that it's in a lot of, I know that in the Everett School District, it's one of the hugest, programs that they've got, and it's very successful, and I would definitely want to see that happening in the North Shore School District.
Thank you. We'll just go down the line.
All right, great. Thank you. That's a wonderful question, and I think it's really important that we prepare children for the future, not the future that we were prepared for, but the one that lies in front of them. So I had a bill last year talking about expanded learning opportunities. And the statistic that stuck with me is that children, by the end of grade 6, children in poverty have 6,000 hours fewer of expanded learning opportunities than their middle-income peers. And those are the kinds of things that PTAs, I mean, when you have a strong PTA, you get those kinds of experiences, the after school, before school, weekend things, the camps that a lot of parents put their children in for enrichment throughout the summer. But we need to do a better job. I think that that's very much related to the opportunity gap. We can do things like middle and high school internships, and particularly in this area where we have such a strong and vibrant tech sector, we can make sure that the businesses are getting involved in the schools to have partnership so that the kids can get the skills they need.
So, there's a lot of focus on STEM. And I really think we need to make sure that we're talking about STEAM. People forget that A, and I think that's an A that's very, very important. My husband's an engineer with SpaceX, and he hires kids from MIT, Caltech, and you can get these great resumes, but you know what's missing on many of them is real hands-on experience. And so we really have to take a look at our education that is focused on STEAM and is also focused on ensuring that people have real life experiences, be that internships, be that externships. But we have to make sure we're providing them a holistic opportunity. And I, for one, and so are my kids, very grateful that Lake Washington School District now has a 7th period, because it gives them an opportunity to take more than the core classes that they need to take. And so we need to make sure we are encouraging more opportunities for our children to learn at all levels. Thank you.
I think we need to take at least a two-pronged approach, and one is a cultural mindset issue, the other is the practical issue. The cultural mindset issue is that for 40 years we've been telling every kid coming out of high school, go to college, go to college, go to college. And we have looked down our nose culturally and within the schools and the counselors at kids who don't want to go to college. We need to change that. There are great careers out there for young people who want to pursue things that are more hands-on. We need to change the way we look at that and the way we treat these kids. The second is facilitating studies for kids that want to do something else. We have Running Start for kids that want to get a head start at college. Why do we not also facilitate those same kids who want to take classes at the VOTEC schools or other things, or take vocational hands-on classes in the school? Robotics are coming, printers that print things instead of pieces of paper. We need to facilitate that.
This is actually something that's a little bit kind of close to my heart, because the only thing that saved me from being beyond saving was the excitement, or the inherent involvement in technology when it was there, when it was real. It gave me a reason to say, this is why I want to do math, this is why I want to be what I want to be. But I started as a machinist. I mean, that's how I paid for college. It was like, otherwise it was going to be nobody. I wasn't going to get much money from anybody. But that inherent system is what we need to bring to the schools now. Students need to have a reason to do what they're doing. And we talk about the problems, but the solutions are much more complicated. And if we don't involve our students in why they're doing what they're doing, they'll get lost, just like I would.
So I think we talk too much about the need to get a good education in order to get a good job. I've always thought of education as a means to become a well-rounded person, to become a good citizen, and also to become educated and ready for the workforce. That said, given how competitive the workforce is, I think that the schools in this area, the districts in this area, are doing a very good job already of articulating the connection between our workforce readiness colleges, such as Lake Washington Institute, into the high schools, and having employers reaching into the high schools as well, to find those students for whom the four-year university track is not appropriate. So we're doing well. We also need ever more STEM slots in higher ed. And I couldn't agree with Monka more that it is not STEM, it's STEAM, science, technology, engineering, arts, and math, because it's that part of the brain with arts that helps you do the scientific stuff as well. It's synergistic.
So one of the things that I think we can do to help prepare students for going into the workforce is to make sure that the schools that they're going to are tailored for them, or that they're able to choose schools that maybe are a little bit better suited for them. One of the ways that we can do this is by supporting charter schools as well, and making sure that parents and families have the ability to make the choice to go to a school maybe that's outside of their area or outside of their district, in order to make sure that their education fits the student. For low-income and minority students in particular, charter schools add an extra 44 days of reading instruction and about an extra 59 days of math instruction. So they're encouraging those students, they're making it so that those students are able to learn more information simply because the school fits those students better. So I think if we can make sure that we are encouraging and supporting school choice as well as charter schools where students can choose to go to a school that's a little bit different, then we'll be able to help those students out better.
So we've talked a lot about wanting to have good programs in schools that allow kids to really get a good STEM education, but that starts with a teacher. I taught elementary school for a number of years, and aside from parental involvement, the next two most important factors in a kid's education is the quality of the teacher in the classroom, and the second one after that is the quality of the teacher in the classroom. So I think we need to work a little bit harder on assuring that the teachers that come through our training programs that get ready to teach are well versed in how it is that STEM or STEAM can best be applied in the school setting. And a lot's been said too about the notion that there is an opportunity for a good, decent paying job that does not require a baccalaureate degree. We can talk a little bit more about that later on. There's a number of things that I think the legislature has recognized that we can do that do not require four-year degrees.
There's been a lot of good ideas already, and there's many that I agree with. I think it's important to provide opportunities for students. Students come in with many different interests, many different skills, talents, passions, and we need to be able to provide ways for them to funnel that through their academics and to see that work out in the rest of their life in a way that they can earn a living wage. I think that the STEM courses are very important, the arts are important, and career VOTEC is, and having that ability, there's amazing careers out there that do not require college, that easily can make 6 figures or more. And also we need to include the liberal arts, because it's always important for kids to have the liberal arts.
Well, thank you. I agree very much with what I've heard on this panel, particularly with what Roger and Monka said about STEAM and, of course, the need for, I think, better internships and partnerships with our great tech sector. I know at Ingram High School in the north end of Seattle, they've done a really good job of incorporating Microsoft and some of their technology focus into their curriculum, and that's terrific. Two things I'd say that I think have not been touched on. I think we need to be a little bit more judicious about making sure that we're testing for the right things and not the wrong things. So, for example, I think we need to reform our state science test, either through changing whether it's going to be required or not. We've actually suspended it, but also making sure that the biology test is, I'm not sure what that is testing when we should be thinking about software and so forth. So whether or not we even need to have one, we need to sort of rethink our science focus on the testing regime. And I'd say secondly, we really have to make sure that we have the slots in the higher ed spaces, which we've done a good job of lately at the University of Washington, our community colleges, for more computer science and more science and engineering programs. That is important for our students to know they have a place to go when they graduate.
Thanks. Representative Springer really said it for me. Teachers, teachers, teachers. We have an incredible shortage of teachers in the state of Washington and nationwide. And especially when you start talking about teachers for math, science, and, you know, if you want to encourage, inspire young women to go into the STEM field, you need teachers who look like them, and the same for underrepresented minorities. And right now, we are doing a miserable job in terms of being able to train those teachers, and teachers are smart people. They're good at economics. They know that if you want to be a teacher, when you've got a master's degree in a science, technology, engineering, biology field, you can do much better elsewhere. We have to do better by them.
Thank you, Jerry. About 4 or 5 months ago, I went to a STEM fair that was over at the University of Washington, where primarily kids of color were showing their projects that they've been working on for months and months and months. And I was blown away at the magnitude of their projects and how just developed they were. But one thing that I really liked about it is that they would team up with companies like Boeing and Microsoft, for example, and work on these projects, but then they would parlay their work into internships. And I think that's one thing we also need to focus on, is that not all of these kids are going to be, either want to go to college or college ready, but they have these skills, but when they put their hands in it, they have tremendous talent. So we need to make sure that we're doing our job for those who don't want to go to college and who are doing the STEM work, that these internships are available, and that they can go on and do well.
As I have toured schools around the district over the past several years, I've been really excited to see that there are there's a lot going on with robotics, a lot of teams and classes and kids getting really excited. And I think that's great. I think that we need to constantly evaluate our class offerings and look at workforce development needs and what's coming for the future. And so I'm really excited to see that happening and seeing 3D printers in lab classrooms and kids getting experience with that. I'd like to see more opportunity for coding in our K-12 system. I think that kids getting involved with coding projects early on really helps you to think in different ways. I think that would be great to have. And I'd also look to our capacity in our higher ed system. When kids are coming out of high school, they need someplace to go with this. When they've been getting ready for this career path, and then they can't get into a higher ed position to keep going, then that's a problem.
Question 2, and we'll start with Shelley Klova. How we fund schools in Washington has been the focus of debate and court cases for many years. The funding mechanism used to increase the level of school funding from the state was a property tax levy swap. This solution has led to funding inequities between school districts and did not fully fund some parts of basic education, such as special education. The current system funds school districts based on property values rather than needs of students. What are your thoughts on how to equitably close those funding gaps and on continuing to increase property taxes to do so?
That takes me back to my old PTA haunts of when I first got involved in PTA advocacy. We worked to redefine and fully fund basic education. So you can imagine my first term, I get to the legislature and we're voting to solve the McCleary issue, but we did it on the backs of low and middle income families through a property tax. There are many other options to create that revenue that we definitely need. I know I talked to school board members here who say, so McCleary says you have funded the formulas. We need to change the formulas. They are inadequate. So things like a capital gains excise tax, things like changing our B&O tax so that it gives a break to the smaller businesses and balances the burden more on the companies that can afford it. Our current tax system does not fit the economic system that we currently have, and we need to change that. And you're going to hear some more ideas down here too. Thanks.
So I'm not going to repeat what Shelley just said, but I'm going to add on to that. The fundamental issue I have is the way basic education is defined. So to fund basic education, that's the state's responsibility. And we have to ensure that basic education means that every child that graduates is ready for life, whatever that life may look for the child. And so making sure we are defining basic education today with what that child needs in order to be successful. And we are always going to have discrepancies based on the area that people live in. That is the simple fact of our lives. You know, I actually coached my children's first robotics league. I don't know how many of you guys did that. You know how expensive it is to do that competition? There's some of us that can afford it and others can't. That is the reality. But we have to make sure that the state is actually funding basic education upfront. Thank you.
The reality is that we in this state, we're funding our schools in a very inequitable way. The levy swap was an attempt, an effort to correct some of those disparities. We're not even 1 year through that yet, and it ultimately gets down to who's complaining is largely whose ox is being gored. There are a lot of school districts that love the levy swap. They came out on the good end of the deal. Here in this district, in this area, we didn't do so well on that. We're going to need to get through this for 2 or 3 years and see how it shakes out before we're really going to know whether or not it works. I would not be coming to you saying we need to increase the taxes, though. Flat.
Yeah, I think my answer is probably not going to make a school district very happy to hear, but the reality is the issue you have is the idea of districts. You say, well, this district's richer, so it's going to get more money. Well, yeah, because it's a district. If you really want to have equitable education, it needs to be centralized, and it's not. It's done that way on purpose, because everybody wants to have the same amount of education for their kids, except I want my kid to have more of an equality than the other one. That's the hard reality of it. We're not going to fix that. It's the best thing we can do is reform the payment mechanism, reform the funding mechanisms. Because until we realize that the way we do it is just simply not going to bring us future forward, that's the only thing we have right now.
So the grand bargain that we were facing, the 11th hour of the session back in 2017 was to raise property taxes around here, lower property taxes everywhere else in the state, and that we would basically subsidize public schools around the rest of the state. And if we didn't agree to that grand bargain, we were going to have to shut the government down. We ended up voting for that, and pretty much everyone at this table who was in the legislature voted against it. So that's the first thing we need to adjust, is the unfair burden of property taxes in this area. We already have high value properties, and so many people on fixed incomes are being priced out of their neighborhoods where they've lived all their lives. The second part is to address the inequities between the districts. North Shore can't afford a seventh period, for instance. North Shore really got the shaft when it comes to healthcare because it's self-insured. So we're going to have to adjust some of the differences between school districts that have joined one another to have more equity there.
So I think that the way that we structure the funding for education currently is quite defective. Lawmakers currently allocate funding to schools based on the number of teachers and defined classroom sizes, in addition to other staff ratios that are controlled by bureaucracies. Local principals have very little flexibility in directing public resources to benefit their students. Literally, they control less than 5% of the money that their schools receive. The teacher salary budget is spent according to a preset grid, which is based on seniority and training credits rather than teacher skill. And so we're actually wasting money with hiring teachers or keeping teachers on that aren't doing a good job, where good teachers aren't actually being able to get the funding that they need so that they can be encouraged and keep teaching our kids really well. We need to shift to student-focused funding. And that would ensure that every student receives the resources that his or her school needs in order to be able to provide high-quality education for them. Basically, the money follows the student.
So in 2017, we finally finished our obligation under the McCleary decision. And essentially, what we were trying to solve is the inequities that I think you've heard along the table here, and that is the education that students were getting in the state of Washington was not equitable. If you were in North Shore, Lake Washington, Riverview, Bellevue, you had a pretty darn good education. But if you were in Chewelah or Dayton or Yakima, that was not necessarily the case, and that's simply not acceptable. Our Constitution will not allow it. So the way we solve that is we pool everybody's money, comes into the state through various forms, state then allocates it out on a formula basis. And we do in fact allocate it to districts based on student need. For example, if you have a higher population of special ed students, you get almost twice the allocation for that student. So we have done that. There are some things that we need to work out, and special ed is certainly one of them, and the levy, the cap on the levy is another one, so we'll get into that later.
Under the McCleary decision, the legislature was facing a number of competing demands because there's constitutional limitations. There's also the McCleary mandates. And one of the problems is that the Constitution says that all property has to be taxed at the same rate, which does cause property around here to be taxed much more because it's worth much more than, say, in Chehalis or in the middle of the state. There's needs to be adjusted, but we have to work within the Constitution of the state of Washington. If the legislature proposes funding and tries to pass funding that goes against the Constitution, then it just results in expensive court battles that will not help our students at all and just delay the actual solutions that need to be made.
Well, this is a complicated situation. Going back to the original McCleary decision, the state has put more money into education. I take a little bit different tack. I think the McCleary decision was mostly about inadequate funding on the whole. It was secondarily about inequality in funding across districts. It was not important, but the core part of the case was that we had to bump up funding overall, and that has happened to some degree, but it's been somewhat done in an inequitable way. I voted against the levy swap proposal 3 times in 2017. I voted to cut and sponsor the property tax cut last year that we did, that we'll be receiving, and I'm hoping we can find a way to do that again or keep it going. The main thing we have to do if we want to help districts, if we can give them a little more levy flexibility, that's good. If we can't, then we have to increase funding for special ed, classified administrative staff, and healthcare costs so that they're not using that out of their current local levy limits. That's what I'm hearing that the districts need right now.
If you have a child in high school, how many of you have a child in high school? Great. And you know the situation that you have to have 24 credits to graduate. You do the math here. That's 4 years, 6 periods. What happens if your child has cancer or a severe concussion playing sports or another injury or is very ill, as my son was? How do you get your child to graduate on time when the state doesn't pay for a 7th period? How does that happen? The school district is barred by law now from using your levy money to pay for that 7th period because it's part of basic education. The state's not paying for it. It is one of many of the structural deficits. And in order to do this, we have to make our tax system more fair, begin taxing wealth in the state of Washington so that we can pay properly for education.
Yes, we did pass but McCleary fixed last year. Supreme Court said that we were okay, but we still have work to do, as been alluded to earlier by some of our folks here in the panel. We still need more counselors. We still need more nurses. Special ed is woefully underfunded. So we still have much to do in next year in order to fix this. Plus, there are many school districts already throughout the state that are predicting in a couple years that they're going to be woefully hurting for funds. My hometown district, where I'm from, the Old Lake School District, is already predicting massive underfunding in about 2 or 3 years and will need help. So it clearly may have been, I guess, fixed, and the court said we were okay, but we still have work to do.
My parents are retired, and I think about them living on a fixed income when I think about property taxes going up. I think that our district, our area, did not come out very well in the impacts of the change in school funding. And I think about those people out there on a fixed income who are struggling. You know, the fact is that poor and middle-class families in the state are taxed. If you look at state and local taxes combined, they're taxed at a rate 5 to 10 times as high as really wealthy families. And I don't think that's fair. I think we're all in this together. And if we want to have good schools, we can. We just need to all be in this together. And that's the problem we need to fix. If we have progressive tax reform, we can deliver tax relief to the middle class and working families and still have the revenue we need to fund excellent schools.
Well, I'm on a fixed income now. I'm on Social Security. My husband's going to be on it next year. He just closed his company down Friday, and that means there won't be any income, but we're going to still have exorbitant property taxes. And I don't think I want my taxes increased any longer. But one of the things that I look at, and as I look at the Constitution, how it says we need to amply fund education, I think we need to redefine what amply means. And see how that calculation is done based on, what Amber was saying, something about, as far as how many teachers we have, how many students there are there in the school districts. One way I think we could possibly manage the situation is go by a per child funding. And this is something that could be done, and I guess I need to start.
Question 3, and we'll start with Makadingra on this one. With the recent rise in school violence across our nation and the ongoing threat of natural disasters, emerging infectious diseases, or terrorism, emergency preparedness becomes increasingly relevant. The legislature has recognized that comprehensive, safe school plans are of paramount importance and mandates that each school have one. But there are no guidelines for the creation of those plans, little communication with families, and no funding for needed emergency supplies. Schools with PTAs are often well equipped, while other schools are not. What is the role of the state in making sure our students are safe at school in the event of an emergency, and what can we do different than we're doing now?
Wow, that's a lot in a question for a 1-minute response. Emergency, we had gun violence, we had the environment, and we had the emergency preparedness kit. As a PTSA parent, I responded to those emails that say, please help us clean out our emergency kit to make sure things aren't expired. And you're right, you need to have an active PTSA in order to get a lot of that work done. So as a parent, as someone who's been a prosecutor for 18 years, I guess when we talk about emergency preparedness, not about gun violence, and not about the environment, schools are changing. When I went to school, we didn't have to have a first-person shooter drill. They do that regularly now. We did an earthquake drill where we went under the table, stayed there, and then we were fine. And so what it means to prepare our schools for an emergency has changed over the years. And I look forward to working on that. Thank you.
I have to agree with Monka, that's a lot of a question to fit in 60 seconds. The resource officers that we have in the high schools and some of the junior highs, they're not there strictly to deal with a potential active shooter. They're there to deal with a lot of the other kinds of problems that can come up, including emergencies. Maybe it means giving those officers additional training and some additional equipment and resources for them to work with in the event of an emergency of whatever kind. But it also goes to the culture in the schools, starting at K and going all the way through 12. Making the students understand that they're not there just as passive students. If there's an emergency, they have a role to play too, and it's not just having a drill to, know how to escape the building in the event of an active shooter. Training programs that teach and treat the students as an integral part of the solution, I think, could go a long ways.
So I'll kind of skip the preparedness, because I believe the PTSA as well as the school can work with the students and make it as a part of a project. That's what they did in my son's class. It was actually pretty interesting. He brought it home and what's this little orange bag? So, I mean, that's an interesting portion of it, and involving the parents in that. There's a lot of parents like me who kind of know a lot about doing that. I'm going to stick just to the gun violence side of it. There's a lot of people who tell you that you can pass a whole lot of laws to solve that, but then there was a shooter in Santa Fe that killed 10 students with a shotgun and a revolver. And it proves immediately one basic point. One of the projects that I've been working on for the last year is called the Safe Schools and Office program, and it's a service that we designed to solve this issue. And it uses AI, and it uses really good visual analytics to do these things, to give information, because the number one thing that saves kids is not a resource officer, it's not necessarily a law, it's information. Every single time a kid has died in school, or a large amount of it, is because of bad information, and that's what we need to solve.
So I chair the Public Safety Committee in the House, and this is part of our jurisdiction to make sure that schools are safe, particularly after disasters. So a lot of this is about disaster preparedness, and I have to say, we are really not prepared. And Monica is talking about, the storage closet full of expired emergency materials. That's actually way too common. One thing that I've learned is that schools should not be the place for people to seek shelter after an emergency, because you want to get the school up and running as quickly as possible after a disaster to give a sense of normality to the neighborhood again. So we don't actually have places of shelter anywhere else. So this is a vexing problem. Disasters are never going to happen, right? And then all of a sudden it does, and we find we are not prepared for it. So this is one of my committee's major focuses.
So in order to do any of this, we really need to address the issue of sustainable funding for our schools. Funding right now is so convoluted that the public and many policymakers have no idea how much school districts are spending to educate children, much less have any idea where to make changes to facilitate improvements in the quality of public schools. We need a clear and simple way to measure whether or not officials are properly funding education. A better approach is what we've talked about with the funding following the child. It's been successful in many schools across the nation and is structuring funding based on each student. This allows school funding to be measured by the cost of educating each child. It can include a multiplier for children requiring special services, so that a typical student might receive $13,000 a year, while a disabled student or an ESL learning student, English as a second language student, might receive $26,000. A clear per student method of funding would show definitively where the legislature is failing and what it needs to do to change that. Thank you.
So the question was around emergency preparedness, and that is a big topic for 1 minute. I agree with some of the panelists up here that we sort of could divide that into a couple of different categories. One is the sort of the natural disaster, the environmental, the earthquake, the bad windstorm, whatever it might be. I would hope that every school district and every school in each of those districts has a plan, and I'm sure they do, and that plan ought to be coordinated with their local governments. When I was the mayor of Kirtland, we set up emergency management centers where we had supplies, and oftentimes those container boxes were on school grounds. It's not that we used the school as a shelter, but it was a place where you could get infrastructure in and get product out. So that's sort of the emergency management portion of it that I think school districts have to play a really critical role in conjunction with their local governments. The whole issue of violence in schools is another topic. I'm sure we'll get into that. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to go, but I appreciate the time.
So again, that this is a question with so many different parts. I think one of the clearest responsibilities for the state is to make sure that the students are in facilities, in buildings that are safe. And that's a paramount duty of the state and of the districts, because the ability of a facility to withstand the disaster is the first way that you help the children survive. First and most important. And the second thing is that a lot of times emergency preparedness is best done by the community. And I'm of the mindset that I think that many of our solutions are actually much better done by the community and by families than by a government deciding something. I've seen great solutions where, and also families and communities are very apt to help fund and donate toward emergency preparedness, and doing it together is a great option.
Well, I think that the state is woefully underprepared for earthquake and tsunami, among other things. I met last year with our National Guard General and the emergency management team, and they told me something really frightening, which I'll say today, which is we have to spend up significantly to get to the level of unprepared. That's what they said to me, which made what's left of my hair go on fire. And so we've got a lot of work to do there overall. On school safety, I think you can look for a school safety bill this year, and I think with the initiative 1639, the ballot, I don't think there'll be a gun component in the bill if the other part passes it by initiative. And so what we're going to end up focusing on is more threat assessment. We've got a really good model in Vancouver, Washington, to try to prevent and get more mental health services for those kids. It's called the Salem-Kaiser method. We should standardize that and bring it out around the rest of the state. They don't have it, as I understand it, here in this region, so we've got more work to do there, but look for, I hope, a bipartisan school safety bill that all of us can get behind.
I'm the prime sponsor of a bill to modernize school safety plans, which has passed the House Education Committee this year and maybe last year as well. The last place you want to be storing your emergency supplies in the state of Washington is school building. Almost none of our districts have done an assessment of the ability of school buildings to stand up and not kill our children in an earthquake. And that's really sad. It is our first fundamental duty to make sure that a child goes to school and comes home safely. And the cost of just doing the engineering studies is literally hundreds of millions of dollars, and then it is billions of dollars in order to upgrade those buildings. And we need to be doing it on a schedule so that we know when children will be safe at a firm date.
Thank you. In terms of emergency preparedness, I don't think I can add much differently than what my colleagues have said up here, but I would like to echo what Representative Paulette just said. We got to really make sure that our facilities are modern and up to date. Obviously, we have so many of our schools in conditions that just need so many upgrades. So the sooner that we can get more investment and making sure that these capital upgrades are made, at least it gets these schools a little bit safer. On the gun violence, I think Senator Dink alluded to, the only thing we had to worry about was, earthquake preparedness and going under a table. I never had, of course, had to worry about a gun being brought into school. But we need to make sure that, again, kids have access to counselors and to teachers and have that confidence and that confidentiality, and they feel safe in reporting these. And then also, it also means law enforcement. If they aren't able to tell them, that there is a police officer there ready to help them if they need that help.
So I would agree. The state has definitely a policy role to play in this area, as Representative Paulette discussed. I think that we can share best practices and ideas across the state, but the details and the implementation, as Representative Springer mentioned, really have to be well coordinated at the local level. That's really key. because policies that work well in a rural area might not be best for an urban area and vice versa. I mean, that's part of why we have school districts, so that local communities can figure out what's right for them. And then once we have those plans, the big question is, how do we pay for it? We've heard a little bit about how much that could cost. So is this something that we want to put this money into? And if so, where does that money come from? That's going to be the tough question.
Well, as I was thinking, you know, when we were talking about a major disaster, I think the only major disaster we're going to have here is an earthquake. I can't see us getting a tsunami. I mean, it would take a long ways to get here from the Pacific Ocean. So I think we really need to concentrate on earthquakes. And obviously we need to make sure that our buildings are built to be earthquake safe. And if we have older buildings, they need to be retrofitted to be earthquake safe. And when we come to the school violence, I've thought about this. I mean, I've been thinking about this for quite a while. And, you know, when we've got kids in school that are troubled, and that is definitely a problem, and they're known for a violent behavior, we need to make sure that it's mandatory that an investigation goes on, and that we allow the resource officers to report them to the police and CPS if necessary. Hiring more resource officers, and open campuses, we need to be retrofitted to make sure doors are locked down.
So, school violence, natural disasters, disease, epidemics, all of those are important concerns. And I think my response is going to echo Representative Springer's, because we both served in Kirkland City Council government. And so I know the work that our community did with community emergency response teams. I think we need to leverage the community resources that we have, and all of the other governmental agencies like fire departments, hospitals, et cetera, who do this kind of planning and who do it very well. We need to make sure that we're coordinating together with them. You know, churches were one of the entities that we coordinated with in Kirkland, so that we would have a place for gathering of the community after a disaster. But I think the main issue, I do think the state needs to step up, but a kid's ability to survive a disaster should not be incumbent upon what the quality and funding level of the PTA in their school is, and that's the bottom line.
You will go to one more 1-minute answer questions, and we'll start with Dale. According to the Healthy Youth Survey, anxiety, depression, and suicidal thoughts are alarmingly common among students. These mental health needs affect all aspects of well-being and learning outcomes. What role should schools play in addressing the mental health needs of students?
I think that the difficulties that our younger students sense are driven largely by the test process that goes on. You know, the students in Japan don't face any tests until our 4th grade, I believe. Their focus is on learning and having fun doing it. And I'm not saying that school's a play day for them, but it's an emphasis on teaching the kids and not demanding that they regurgitate on a weekly basis what they've learned. We put kids under a lot of stress when we say, okay, test. And so I think that's one of the things that we could take a look at, of how do we convey the material to the child in a way that they can grasp it and enjoy it and learn it, and not feel constantly burdened with the need to perform on a test.
One of the most important things that a school and the teachers at a school can do is be that early warning for a kid's emotional state. Parents it's kind of funny, we never think of our kids as being something more than the child we love, and we don't think of them as possibly having any issues. They're perfect. We know it because they're our kids. This is really where we as a society can really do more than just educate our kids. We can also help the schools can help raise our kids emotionally as well as just, educationally. But we do need to recognize that most mental illnesses, most mental issues start at a very young age. And we don't right now. We wait for the problem to happen, and then we react. When we could have known about it much longer before. This is something where we really need to focus in the next years, is really focusing on what makes kids who they are when they become adults.
It's interesting, from the Healthy Youth Survey, the incidence of unwanted pregnancy is down among our high schoolers. The incidence of misuse of alcohol and other drugs is down. Car crashes are down, but anxiety, depression, and suicide are way up. And this really seemed, my 10th grade daughter, I'm going home to her right after this to help her with her own anxiety and the high stress of the experience of a high schooler today, much more attuned to what's going on in the world around us. And so what we need is something that I deeply regret we did not fund in the budget this last time, which was many more school counselors in middle schools. And so that's something we have to step up and provide funding for.
So, suicide is increasing in all regions of Washington state right now. It is the second leading cause of death for children, teens, and young adults. My oldest son lost a good friend to suicide last year, and it's still difficult for our entire school community. We're not sure exactly why rates are so high right now, but we do know that students feel an excessive amount of pressure in our culture. With our state's utter failure in the area of mental health care, we really need to prioritize addressing this. Researchers are looking into connections between depression and suicide and social media. Excuse me, but although they have found a link between anxiety and social media in young adults, they have yet to find much more than that. One of the major known contributing factors to depression and suicide is actually isolation. Humans are meant to be in community, and as we spend more and more time on our devices, students spend less and less time in community. Adequately addressing the mental health crisis in our state should include forming partnerships between schools and healthcare providers, as well as educating residents, especially parents, about the need to be in community with one another regularly. Thank you.
Mental health is such a big issue, and so many kids come into the schools with different needs that it is always helpful to have understanding teachers and as well as counselors to deal with many issues. But as Amber said, the community and families are the first support for students, and the first place and the best place for students to get the support. I worked as a child death review coordinator in King County for a year and a half, and I did see there's a definite link between students who did not have community were much more at risk than students that did have community in different ways. And for us to find ways to encourage community and encourage families and support them is the key to helping students.
Well, I want to compliment Amber on her comment about isolation of kids. I think that is really a big part of what we're seeing today. It's maybe a different form than we had when I was growing up in the 80s, but it's definitely true. There's something called FOMO. Some of you hear fear of missing out. So many kids. I know some of my kids. I have 2 kids, and one in particular, and it's always a big issue with him when he sees other kids online or on his device or on social media who are doing something he's not doing. It's an issue, for sure. I think we need to do a better job with more school nurses. I think we need to have school social workers. We don't have hardly any school social workers around the state. It's a pittance with what we need. There are parts of the state that are veritable deserts for child psychologists. We have more of them in this region. We need to do a better job with telemedicine. We have a program at Children's that we've used for other parts of the state that you can get psychological counseling. So we have a lot of work to do to get children the supports that they need.
Well, not surprisingly, Senator Fromm channeled what I was going to say. The school I think there's a misnomer. People think that a school guidance counselor is a behavioral health specialist. They're not. That's not their job. That's not what they were trained for. The school social work, prototypical school formula, funds like 0.4% of a school social worker or a psychologist per school. So we're way under what we need. And then our higher ed system in the state needs to be able to step up in terms of training people, and we haven't invested in the training for the psychology residency programs. As part of our behavioral health obligations, we are way behind other states in terms of our training and being able to place people in the community where they're needed.
Yes, schools should be heavily involved in making sure that our kids are safe at school regarding these issues. As Senator Frock alluded to, obviously we need more social workers. Representative Springer, who left, we need more, Representative Goodman, more school nurses. But I think we also need to make sure that we get that message across again to our kids, that if you hear something from one of your friends, one of your classmates, to say something. Don't be afraid to say something, either again with a teacher or with with a nurse or a social worker or your principal. It's okay to do that. We got to get that message across.
Some of my colleagues said some great stuff on this already. Senator Frock and Representative Goodman both mentioned the need for more counselors, nurses. Teachers are there, and other school personnel are there in the classroom working directly with kids, and they often see early signs of problems. But they can't be the counselors too. They need some capacity, some place to refer to, or some other process to take. And I don't think the capacity is there right now. So that's what we're talking about needing to build. It's certainly not currently funded by the state in any meaningful way. And so that's something that we should consider. It's really about building that capacity and adapting to the fact that times are changing for our kids. We have to keep up and update our policies and our procedures as the times change.
I agree with just about everybody that has spoken here, and what Dale said about, this constant testing, and the kids are getting they're overwhelmed and they don't think that they're good enough, and their testing rates are down, and so it makes their self-esteem or their self-worth go down. I think that social media has just been such a detriment to kids. The bullying that goes on social media with kids themselves. The constant cell phone usage, so they're isolating themselves. So they're not within the community. They're not being, what's the word I'm trying to say? I mean, they're kind of getting to where they don't want to be around others. My son, for one, he wants to play video games constantly. And I'm like going, no, enough is enough. Get out there, be with people, and stop being so depressed all the time.
So there was a bill last session that unfortunately didn't go anywhere that I would definitely support if it comes back again. And it was directing the Office of the Superintendent of Public Instruction to develop training and the funding to develop the training for school staff so they can detect and screen and act upon the kinds of behaviors that would be evident that a child is really having trouble. But even that would point us to the inadequacy of our current mental health system. We need to get to a point in this state and in this country where we have the same kind of responsiveness. We have first aid, we have a 24-hour nurse line, we have urgent care and ER, and then follow-up care for a mental health issue just as you would for anything physical health. We need to break down the stigma of mental illness And that starts with every one of us, because we all know someone who deals with it. And we need to make sure that our schools are inclusive and welcoming communities with no bullying or stress.
So for the last 18 years as a prosecutor, I actually ran a therapeutic alternative unit where I supervised mental health court. Over 8 years, I've been on the board of NAMI Eastside, National Alliance on Mental Illness. And I know that we are now, through NAMI, partnering with our schools for 2 programs. We do Ending Silence and Educating the Next Generation. Because Shelley is right, you have to break down that stigma. We have learned so much about behavioral health in the last 10 years. It's astounding. We now have to make sure that we're putting that into practice. Like ensuring that the counselors in our schools are looking at adverse childhood experiences. So when that happy kindergartner comes into the classroom, they actually understand what trauma they may have experienced or what issues they're dealing with at home. Because once you understand these issues, you are in a better position to address them. And so really taking a lot of that data, a lot of that research, and making sure we're making informed decisions. Thank you.
Thank you. At this time, we're going to exhale. We're going to change our recording device memory and ask the audience if they have questions on index cards to raise their hand, and we will collect them. All right, we are back. So at this time, we will begin our lightning round. We have a series of questions, and we'll do them until about 8:45. And you have 20 seconds or less. If you don't need your full 20, that's fine. Okay, question 1. Let's see, we're starting with Michael. Right now, to pass a bond to raise funds to build or upgrade schools, a local bond ballot measure must have 60% plus 1 of the vote. In February, every school bond in school districts that were completely within King County failed. Do you support changing the law so that a simple majority of voters, which is 50% plus 1, can pass a bond?
Sadly, I don't. Simply because I see a much bigger issue that we have where we say, oh, well, we're out of money. But we're not. We have more surplus than we've ever had before. And what are we doing with it? Someone answer me that, because I can't seem to figure it out, and none of you can either. They just say we need more money. We don't. We need to adequately fund our education from that source.
For the last several sessions of the legislature, bills have been introduced to make the threshold 50%, simple majority. I have been a co-sponsor each time, and I will be a co-sponsor again, and will support the measure.
No, I don't think that we should change the 2/3 majority or 60% majority for bonds. I think that if you lower it down to simple majority, you end up abusing taxpayers, just passing more and more.
Yes, I would agree that we should not, that 60% is a good measure of being, really having sold the community on the need for the new taxes, and that a lower one would burden people with property taxes they can't pay.
I support simple majority, and the effect that I see, particularly in the school construction context, which I've worked on the last couple of years, is that we have districts that fail to pass a construction bond, and then their districts come to the state anyway, and we end up passing or paying for it out of some kind of special purpose construction fund. It'd be better for them to be in the regular construction program.
I strongly support simple majority. I think it's highly ironic that someone running for the legislature who would be elected with 50% opposes letting the voters decide, and someone would oppose when you have an initiative that takes just 50% to cut your taxes. Why would it take 60% to raise them, as a statement by the community?
I fully support simple majority and look forward to signing as a co-sponsor when that bill is introduced.
I support simple majority. I think that we have to think about what happens when we end up with portables on all our school campuses. And that's why it's so important to pass these things. And also, I'd like to just mention that the North Shore School District does not have a surplus. Absolutely not.
Well, I'm going to have to go with the 60% rule. It would definitely burden our taxpayers. There's a lot of taxpayers in the area that don't have kids, and I don't have kids that are in school, and that would mean that I would be paying way more in taxes if it was going down to 50%.
So in my long history in PTA, we have always been in support of simple majority for bonds and levies. That was one of our issues for many years in a row until we got simple majority for levies. That was partly due to your PTA. Simple majority for bonds was something that got decoupled. I would be in favor of it because the tyranny of the minority is something I think we need to get rid of.
So I'm in support of the simple majority. The 45th district is one of the richest districts in the state. My kids were in Portables in Redmond Elementary, they were in Portables in Redmond Middle School. And we have to make sure that the schools have the resources they need in order to provide our children the services that they need.
I would oppose the simple majority. The 60% rule didn't happen by accident. It was enacted by our legislature a long time ago for good reasons. A bond issue puts a tax on that lasts a long time. It's not 1 year or 2 years or 3 years, it's like a 20-year deal. And I think the 60% rule makes a lot of sense.
That was everybody. Okay, the second question, we'll start with Roger. Based on WAKIDS data, the opportunity gap exists when kids arrive to kindergarten. Should the legislature revise the definition of basic education to include early learning?
Yes, I actually advocated for this back in 2009 or 2010. And then got a bill passed that made preschool an entitlement as of the year 2021. But this was all not making it part of basic education because we weren't even funding K-12, which seems to be a constitutional obligation anyway. But yes, I believe in P through 20, not just K through 12, as part of the definition of basic education.
I think that might not be necessary. I'm not necessarily opposed to it, but I think if we can get in and restructure how we actually do education in our state, where the bureaucrats and the unions aren't the ones deciding what teachers are in the classroom, what kinds of teachers, or which people, that the principals have the ability to do that, we can actually take care of our students, and that may not actually be an issue.
I would support keeping with the K-12 funding and not preschool as well. When preschool is mandatory, then it often is a top-down solution that may not fit every community and every family.
Well, I think our investments in the Early Start Act and preschool are vital, and they've been terrific. I'm a little bit hesitant to roll that into basic ed right now, right after the clear decision. I think we need to see if we don't maintain our funding. We've put a lot of money in recent years, so if that falls off, maybe we should reconsider, but right now I'm okay with where we are.
Thank you, Representative Goodman, for your leadership on this, and I believe that we should be having P through 20 as part of the state's obligation to make sure that we've got a well-educated and ready future for our children, and it doesn't stop at high school, and it doesn't start at kindergarten.
Thank you. I too would support this. Obviously, we need to make sure that every kid gets started as soon as possible, reading, writing, the whole works. And the sooner we get them into our education system and learning, the sooner they're going to be better off as they continue on with the public education.
I would support this proposal as well. The more we can do for kids when they're first starting out, the better prepared they are when they get to school, and I think it makes a huge difference for them. It's just that important.
I don't actually know how I feel about this. I could see, I would have to say no. I would have to say leave the preschools out of basic education.
So we know that high quality early learning gives kids an appropriate start, and we can catch learning disabilities early when we can best treat them. The Heckman equation, if you look that up on Google, because I don't have time to explain it in 20 seconds, it shows that the best return on investment comes with those early investments in children's education, and I don't know whether it should be basic education, but I do know we need it funded.
Yes, given what we know about child development, about brain development, and data that we have on children who start early, we need to do this.
I think we should make it available, but I think it should be at the option of the parent. The parent knows the child the best and is most well-equipped to decide whether their child is ready to attend an organized school activity like preschool, or maybe their child is not going to be ready till next year. Make it available, let the parent decide.
You know, for me, this is kind of a thing, something that happened recently, because my son's pretty young, and I would say that we should make it available. It should absolutely be available, but it shouldn't be mandatory, because my kid went into kindergarten at a second grade math level. He came out at a first grade.
Thank you. Next question, we'll start with Amber. Washington is one of only 12 states requiring passage of standardized assessments for high school graduation. Less than 50% of the 11th graders this past spring achieved a passing score on the new science assessment, and this will be a graduation requirement for the class of 2021. Do you support continuing to link standardized assessments to high school graduation?
How? I think it's pretty obvious that we have a disconnect going on where our students aren't able to pass these tests and they're already over-tested and overworked and overstressed. I think we need to rethink what we are doing and what our goals are. We make sure that these kids are learning, that they're learning how to learn, not just what to learn, and that they're learning to love learning. And we're losing that, and I'm discouraged by that. So.
If I understand the question correctly, it's about the science test? Is that correct? Science standardized.
Right now, English and math are already required, and then science will come back in 2021. You can speak to any of those.
Okay. I think that a certain level of standardized testing is important for high school graduation. It motivates students, and we all know, we all need to be motivated to reach a certain standard. But with science tests, I think there needs to be a lot of work done to make sure that it's an appropriate test for the students and really shows that they are ready to graduate from high school.
Yeah, I have come around on this issue, and I actually think we need to de-link the science test for sure, and I am of the mindset that we may need to consider de-linking all the tests.
All the microphones are gathering at this I'm a strong advocate for not having high-stakes testing for graduation. I think it will utterly drive up the high school dropout rate, and the height of their responsibility is tied to something we talked about earlier, which is that the state says you've got to pass 24 credits of high school. I'm going to stop. Think about that with the test.
I'd be very open at delinking all of the tests. If you look at the results, it's primarily kids of color and kids in underrepresented communities who are the ones who are not doing well in these tests. And so these are just things that we need to look at if we're going to making sure that our kids have a chance to succeed. Again, especially for these kids of color and who come from backgrounds and communities that don't necessarily have the traditional upbringing or background.
I think our state has gone way overboard with all of the testing. It takes away from instructional time in the classroom. I would support de-linking it from graduation requirements. And I also want to mention that these are non-diagnostic tests. If kids are going to spend their time taking a test, it should be something that's going to help them focus on what they need to fix.
I would be in favor of delinking. That's it.
That's all I know. So I know that it's really important to make sure that we have relevance and rigor in the educational system and that kids are able to show us the material that they've mastered. But there are many ways to do that, and I think that the longstanding position of the PTA is to delink standardized testing. There are other ways to show that, and
So we have a pipeline from our schools to our prison. And one of the greatest impact we can have to shut that pipeline is to ensure our kids are graduating with a degree. And so we have to make sure we are delinking graduation from assessment. So I think we have to make sure our kids are learning and we're identifying issues they're having early on, but getting rid of that linkage.
I would be in favor of delinking the test for graduation purposes. I think there are types of tests that can enlighten a graduating student or a student about to graduate. Where does their interest lie? Where does their skill lie? Where do they want to go in life? And tell them something like that, but not define whether they graduate or not.
And now you're going to talk class that are done. I believe in, I guess you call it delinking, but I think we really need to rethink the way we do testing. Testing needs to be designed to help the student determine his future. It's not designed to hold the student back. What we do now is say, here's your future, you can't reach it, go away. We need to say, here's a set of tests, now it helps us understand who you are as a person, it helps you understand who you are, who you will be as a human.
So a student shouldn't have to be required to pass one particular test on one particular day in order to graduate from high school. When I went to school, I took a class, took a midterm, took a final, and satisfied the requirements of that class and got a credit, and then accumulated the necessary credits to graduate. If we do have tests, it should be in the 8th grade and the 9th grade to determine where the students might be deficient so that they can retool their secondary education.
Thank you. We'll go on to the next question. We'll start with Beth. Easy access to guns contributes to unintentional deaths and suicides every year. What are your thoughts on the Dangerous Access Prevention Gun Initiative 1639?
In 20 seconds. I think that the 1639 actually does not address the causes of most gun violence, and it takes away a tremendous amount of freedoms and burdens people that are that have less resources.
Yeah, I completely disagree with my opponent. I think it's a well-crafted initiative. It's in particular the safe storage components is part of, in my view, the equation to stopping some, not all, but some of the school shootings that we've seen. 85% of the time, those individuals get their guns from relatives or those where it's not, or the people close where it's not stored safely at home.
I fully support it. As teacher of public health at the UW, let me just remind you that the #1 cause of deaths amongst young males is being able to access that gun. It takes 5 seconds on average only between idealization of suicide and getting a gun and killing yourself.
I support the initiative. Senator Frock, I think, said it well. It's got good measures in it, and anything that we can do to prevent someone from getting access to a gun that they don't need access to or can do harm is something that we should be supporting.
I support the initiative as well for the reasons that have been mentioned before. Kids having access to guns, we've seen the tragedies that have come out of that. And we were just talking about suicide and mental health issues earlier, and that just ties right into that. So I think the safe storage is really a significant thing we can do to end some tragedies.
I'm not in favor of I-1639. Most responsible gun owners keep their guns in a safe. And it would criminalize anybody that, that wants to defend themselves if the gun is stolen and we're the felon and not the criminal.
This is going to sound like a broken record, but one of the first issues that I engaged on in the legislative platform of the PTA was safe storage of guns, and that was more than 10 years ago. This is about darn time. We've seen that in states like Florida, where they have a dangerous access prevention law, they saw a significant decrease in accidental shootings by children, and that is a preventable tragedy that we need to do more on.
As a prosecutor, a mother, a mental health advocate, anti-domestic violence advocate, I fully support this initiative.
Well, this initiative is enormous. If you look at it, it's over 30 pages long, and to be honest, no disrespect to Mr. Falk, it's a horribly crafted piece of proposal initiative. All you've heard about is storage. That's only one very small piece of 1639. If you want to buy a firearm and this initiative passes, you will give up all of your HIPAA rights to privacy of your healthcare records. The state will have carte blanche to look at your healthcare records anytime they want and all they want.
Interestingly enough, a lot of people are going to say talk like they're experts, but I actually am a gun expert. I had actually studied this very issue over and over again for our Safe Schools project, and I can guarantee you that that initiative will not solve any of it. It would have only solved, possibly would have prevented one school shooting. One. And what does it do? It takes away the rights from poor, impoverished people to defend themselves.
So I do support the initiative, a couple of reasons. One, I actually authored the language regarding dangerous access prevention in the Judiciary Committee, and which actually doesn't require gun owners to do anything. It just says that if you aren't responsible, then you are held criminally liable. But in particular, it's what we know about the brains of adolescents and young adults, that they are not ready to handle firearms until a later age, so it's important to raise the age.
So I think we have to be really careful with this. We need to remember that suicide is rooted in mental illness and depression. It's not measured or rooted in whether you have a gun or whether you have access to a gun. People who are struggling with suicidal thoughts, they are planning. They make a plan beforehand, and if there's no gun available, they will make a plan for something else. This initiative will not actually probably do anything to the suicide rates.
Thank you. We are going to move to questions from our audience. For these, in order to get as many as we can in, we're going to go to 30-second answers. You good with that, Marcia? Okay. So it's a little more time. And we'll start this one with David. Let's see. This is from the audience. How would you decrease the cost of college?
Well, 30 seconds, huh? Well, first of all, we've done some good work in the last 4 or 5 years by working together, Republicans and Democrats, to lower the cost of tuition. There was a big increase a few years ago, so that's the first thing we need to do, is maintain that policy. The second thing we need to do is find ways to fully fund and probably expand up our state need grant, because right now it helps people at the very low end, which is very important, but we also need to get to those who are in the near middle class. That's very important, so that's what I'd like to see happen.
I'll just continue. Senator Frank and I are working very closely on this. We are both prime sponsors of the legislation for the Washington Promise to ensure that every student who graduates from high school who is of middle or low income knows for sure that they will be able to go to 2 years of community college for either a degree or workforce and career training.
So when I went through the University of Washington, I was a beneficiary of the state aid grant, Pell Grants, student loans. But when I got my student loans, they were, I think, at 5%. I think they're a lot more now. But ensuring that we make sure these programs are still available both at the federal level and our state level. We did increase some funding on the state aid grant this past year. So again, these programs that we need to continue.
One proposal that I've liked is the idea of making tuition constant for a student when they enroll in one of our colleges. so that they know what tuition they will be paying the whole time they're there, so that they don't get hit with increases partway and suddenly find that they have to drop out just because they can't afford it. So bringing that clarity, I think, would be helpful. Fully funding the state need grant, as was mentioned before, is something that we've committed to as a state. And I think we also have to pay attention to the proliferation of private student loans and some of the abuses that go on there.
I agree that we need to maintain the college tuition rates that was passed by bipartisan legislature, and ensuring that lower income earners are given a break in tuition.
So we know that the GI Bill really built the middle class in the post-war years. Those were investments that the government made in our population and had great effect. So aside from some of these other ways that we can invest, I think that loan forgiveness, particularly in areas of critical need and things like healthcare and mental health and teaching, are really important programs.
Student education debt is our next financial crisis as a country. It's coming, it's real. And given that it's only 30 seconds, I'm actually going to echo some of what Senator Frocht was saying, the Representative Paulette was saying, and just know that in the next legislative session, this is going to be one of the things that we'll be actively working on.
I think we can have legislation that caps the interest rate that students are asked to pay on their student loans. There are a lot of called predatory student loans going on, and people are going to be paying those loans until they're grandparents. Not a good thing. We can mandate that colleges cap the tuition that a student's going to pay the year they start. They are promised, you get 4 years at this rate, that's going to be your tuition rate for at least 4 years. We can tell colleges, by the time a student starts their second year, you have to help them plot a plan that lets them get through in 4 years instead of not having classes available.
I think a key component to bringing down the cost of education in post K-12 is really recognizing that we have a lot of college education that won't help the kid at all. And we need to actually make sure that we're funding education futures that will actually return something to them. And that's the number one thing we can do to bring that down. The other thing is we have to remember that when we look at debt, one of the reasons America was so great was because we had low debt, and now we're going to be in the next 10 years.
So the question of expanding opportunity for higher education is really a funding matter. During the Great Recession, we decimated funding for higher education in our budget because nothing constitutionally or statutorily requires it. So we still need to build back that funding for higher ed, which includes keeping tuition low. I actually introduced a bill to guarantee the same tuition for 4 years if you complete on time, which would actually provide an incentive for more students to complete on time and get more students through the system, and also dramatically increase the need grant.
So financial aid for colleges is kind of a double-edged sword. It's great to allow kids that are underserved to be able to go to school by providing that, but college costs then go up because fewer people are paying the tuition and they have to be able to cover the financial aid for the other students, and so that's part of the reason that costs for college are so high. The other side of this is that we're forcing a lot of kids to go to college that don't actually need to go to college, don't want to go to college, wouldn't benefit from college. I think if we have the ability then to encourage kids to go into the trades, or maybe do alternative college like online, something like that, that might help too.
I think that the decreased costs in college that was accomplished for the university, for the Washington University systems, that was accomplished a few years ago, was a huge benefit for the middle class and everyone else as well. And I would support keeping the tuition lower at the Washington systems, because, yeah, and as well as continuing need grants.
Okay, thank you. I think we're going to squeeze in 2 more. And this one's for Jerry. What is your stance or solution for the safe injection sites proposed by the City Council of Seattle. Has to do with the opioid crisis.
Seattle King County Board of Public Health has said we should try to save lives instead of having people inject in neighborhoods I represent, out in apartment building front doors or on the streets. We should have a place where they can inject and have their lives saved with Narcan if they overdose, and where their needles will be collected and they will be encouraged to get tested for HIV, hepatitis C, etc.
Yes, I too am supportive of safe consumption sites, mainly for the reasons that Representative Paulette just said. It really provides safety for that user, but it also we're able to provide resources and assistance to those who need it to make sure if they do need additional assistance or additional help in whatever they need it, folks are there to help them get through with what they're dealing with.
So in my professional life, I'm a data scientist, so this is an issue where I would want to look at the data. My concern would be around neighborhood safety and community safety. I think that this is something that has been studied, and if the research says that this is something that makes communities safer, then I think that's something that we should consider. I think that the communities that look at these things have much more severe issues, much more concentrated in certain areas than Bothell does or other cities in this district right now.
Seeing that I live in Snohomish County, there's nothing safe about a safe injection site. I disagree with so far anybody that's talked about this. We need to rehabilitate drug users. We don't need to be enabling them to continue their addiction.
So these are largely individual community decisions that have to be made given all of the circumstances in any particular community. So I don't think at the state level is the right place to make that. The investments that we make in drug courts and like in Everett, we have a diversion facility, things that we can do to affect the demand side, I think are very important for combating the drug use in general.
So right now, if someone wanted treatment and they said, okay, I'm ready to go into rehab, get me a bed, we'll say, thank you very much, be back in 3 months. I'm definitely in favor of making sure that people have access to treatment when they're ready for treatment, and I want to make sure that people aren't dying. Given that there are no cities in the 45th district that are looking at safe consumption sites. And again, it is an issue that the cities, along with the communities, have to decide if there's enough data and research to indicate that that is appropriate for that city.
I am adamantly opposed to safe injection sites. Monk is right, there are no cities in the 45th district that are looking at this seriously. I think that a safe injection site is nothing more than a community saying that we will facilitate a slow and perhaps involuntary suicide. Whatever money would get spent on that would be far better spent on even the feeblest treatment.
Quick show of hands, if your kid came home and said, hey, I'm really on heroin, can you go ahead and buy me some needles, would you? No hands, huh? I wonder why. Because it's stupid. Well, then, there you go. That answers your question.
Talk to you later.
Okay. How is it that our legislature can try to get guns out of people's hands to keep them from committing suicide, but then puts needles in their arms to make sure they'll do it? That's crazy.
So I support any policy that's based on good data. And the data that I'm aware of from around the world with regard to these overdose prevention sites is that public order public order increases, public safety increases, the incidence of overdose deaths decreases dramatically. Those long-term, high-volume, chronic users who are not going to quit finally have a gateway to treatment for the first time in their lives. The neighborhood gets cleaned up, kids don't want to start because it looks like a medical problem. The data shows that it's very effective policy.
So what I'm actually finding is that that's not true at all. The recent studies have shown quite conclusively that heroin injection sites perpetuate and exacerbate the opioid crisis, and that we would do well to take the information into account as we work to address the crisis with compassion. We need rehabilitation, plain and simple. We need people to actually be in programs. If we enable it, it makes them, maybe it prolongs it before they die, but it does not actually relieve their enslavement to it, and it probably will make it more likely that kids or other people will get involved that wouldn't have before if it wasn't available and easy.
Supervised injection sites are only safe within the 4 walls. Outside of those walls, as has been seen in Vancouver for many people who have gone to visit those places, outside those walls, there are people using drugs and dying on the streets. The ambulances are constantly going to take care of overdoses outside the walls. Drug dealers congregate around those places. People who I know that are recovering addicts say that it's a horrible idea. It just allows people to poison themselves over a longer period of time, and that would have been the worst thing for them in terms of being able to recover and stay alive.
And I think there's obviously a dispute in the public health research on this. I mean, there's studies that go both ways. My view is it's a local control issue. And as far as I know, I don't think any community that does not want to have one of these should not be forced to have one. If the city of Seattle and their elected representatives choose to move in this direction, I think that's for the representatives in Seattle and their voters to decide.
Thank you. Last question, an easy one for Javier. Today's,
I like easy.
yeah, you'll love this. Today's political climate is more divided than ever. What is your opinion, or what will you do to try and unite our state?
Well, obviously, with the current climate in Washington, D.C., it's fortunately hasn't transcended here, at least in Washington. I think for the most part, we've been able to avoid some of those bitter partisan battles. I guess all I can say is it's our role, the state legislature, to work with our governor and the rest of all of our senators and all our state representatives to making sure that we're passing good policy that's for the good of all Washingtonians in our state.
Fortunately, things aren't as bad in the state legislature as they are nationally. I've been very proud to work across the aisle on good policy, a landmark bill on railroad worker safety. I worked extensively with the gentleman across the aisle to develop that bill and get it through. And as much of the time I've been in the legislature, we've had a divided legislature with Democrats in the majority in the House and Republicans in the Senate. So we have worked together to get a lot of stuff done.
I think the first thing is we need to bring back civil discourse. Right now there is so much division. One side says that what they believe in is what you need to believe in, and that's it. And we need to be able to start having conversations again and bringing that back to the table.
Okay, so everything I need to know in life I learned in PTA. And one of those things was we were a nonpartisan but political organization, and you learned how to coalesce around the issues that were important to you and put aside the rest of the things that you didn't agree on. That was my training ground. I carried that into the city council in Kirkland as a nonpartisan position, and I found that the same thing was true, that we could have disagreements and still be collegial and respectful of each other, and that's how I operate.
So I talk a lot about values because I think there are more things that we have in common than what differentiate us. So I talk a lot about honesty, integrity, supporting our communities, because I think these are values we can all get behind. And as a prosecutor who worked in therapeutic alternatives to incarceration, for the last 18 years, I've been bringing law enforcement, mental health, domestic violence, prosecutors, defense attorneys together to come up with practical solutions. So a track record of working with people from all different backgrounds to come up with sustainable solutions.
I think this is a terrific question. Look at the two of us. We're running against each other for the same seat. We're opposite genders. We're about a generation apart. Manka traces her ancestry back to India. I have ancestry I can trace back that came over on the Mayflower. And if somebody looked at us and focused on those differences, you would be small-minded and you would be making a horrible mistake. Because what you need to be looking at is here we sit before you, civilly, answering these questions, obviously and demonstrably showing our belief in the democratic system of government that we have in our nation. What we have in common is so much greater and so much more important than what the differences are. That's what we, not just in the legislature, but throughout our culture, that's what we need to be looking at, what we have in common.
You really like that question.
That's right, he got Larry's time, it's okay.
So, it's absolutely true that we can have some pretty strong disagreements and some pretty strong words even, but we can walk away, we can still respect each other. Because there's the key things, like, Goodman here, he's a Democrat, so I heard, and I'm a Republican, but that's not who I am. And this is a core of what our America is a problem right now. You are not your party. You are not a D, you are not an R, you're an H, you're human. You're the human party, that's it. And until we get that figured out, we are a reflection of our media. And watch what your media is doing.
Over the last dozen years, I brought parties together who disagree sharply with each other in a collaborative problem-solving process on many different issues. And I don't believe that partisanship helps governance or service at all. Partisanship, I even find uncomfortable during election campaigns. I think that we should bring people together to solve problems. It sounds trite, but that's our role in the legislature. It's not to change the world, but to solve problems. And the way to do that is to set your positions aside and find a common interest that we can gather around.
Said. I think we're not as divided as we fear. It looks really bad on TV and when you listen to the radio and on your computer, but we're all here. We have very similar cares. We have very similar worries. We're worried about homelessness and mental health crisis and addiction and our education, our kids and things like that. We have the same goals. We want to fix those things. We want to take care of people. We want to be compassionate and still be responsible. Sometimes we just disagree about how to reach those goals. And honestly, those disagreements make our community stronger because we check each other. It's sort of like, hey, did you think of this from this perspective? This is what builds our society and our community into better, is actually having those disagreements in that different perspective.
The beauty of our country is that we have our Constitution and our amendments, especially the First Amendment, that we're supposed to allow people from very different backgrounds to work together and to express their opinions. They may be very different ones, and respect that expression. I think that one of the most important things is to respect other people's right to free speech, and also the freedom of religion and conscience. And I think that that's something that has been missing recently and needs to be improved.
Well, for the majority of my career, the 7 years I've been in the state senate, my party's been in the minority. So in any instance when I wanted to try to get something done, I had to work across the aisle because I had to get the majority to agree with me. And so I think what that requires is you have to listen, you have to be open-minded. An unknown skill is creativity. And you have to remember that everybody who you're dealing with was sent to the legislature by the majority in their community who felt that that person represented their values. And if you do those things, then I think you have an opportunity to work together and really bridge some of these divides.
I sit at a forum like this, and I listen to the members of the other party, and I take note of where we've all been in agreement on either a value or, say, school testing, and say, my gosh, when I'm down in Olympia, I'll be working together with those members of the other party on those issues. You can't do that if you call people names. You can't do that if you're trying to run constantly instead of saying, now I'm in Olympia and it's time to roll up my sleeves and work together for the good of the state.
That is all the time we have for questions tonight. I want to thank all of you for coming out tonight and participating in this forum, a true exercise in democracy, and I want to thank all the candidates for not only participating, but for stepping up to service and to public service for all of us. A few housekeeping notes. This video will be up on our website within the next few days. And before I turn all the candidates loose, if you guys could gather for a photo. We are PTA, we love to document things with photos, so if you wouldn't mind, we'll hold you for a few more minutes. And I want to thank everyone. Can you all give the candidates a hand? Thank you.